Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and we're starting a new unit today on evolution. Now, let me go ahead and say that I know this topic can be a little controversial for some people, but what I'd like to ask you is try to keep an open mind. Let me present all the information and evidence that supports this theory, and then when we're done talking about it, if you feel like it's something that makes sense and something that you can get behind, that's great. It's an idea that has a lot of support in the scientific community. If after we've talked about everything, if you don't believe in it, if you don't think that it really answers all the questions, that's fine too. That's the greatest thing about being in America. No one can tell you what to believe. So what I always tell my students is the stuff that we're talking about today, I need you to know it in your head, but I don't necessarily need you to believe it in your heart. So just try to keep an open mind as we progress through this unit. Let me present all the information, and then at the end of it, you can decide if this is something you want to believe in or not. Okay, so we're going to talk about evolution, and today specifically we're talking about early evolution. So what was the Earth like in its first few million years after it was formed? We're going to talk about how we started off with a bare planet and how we got to all the complicated life forms that we see today. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and hop into it and see what we're talking about today. So I wanted to talk about life on Earth. And like I just mentioned, if you looked at the Earth today, you would see all these various and complex forms of life. But the Earth has not always been like that. In fact, for about a half billion years after the Earth formed, the Earth was similar to the other planets in the solar system. It was bare, it was devoid of life, and empty of any organisms. So how did life on our planet get started? And how did we end up with all the crazy modes of life that we see today? Those are going to be some of the things that we talk about. So I wanted to show y'all this picture. This is kind of a timeline of life on Earth. Okay, so what we're doing is we're starting all the way over there on the left, and we're going to walk through some of the big steps that's happened on this timeline as we work our way to the right of this timeline. So what I wanted to point out, you can see that about 5 billion years ago, the sun forms. The sun condensed out of a nebula, which is a cloud of gas and dust. Everything that didn't accumulate into the sun would become the rest of the solar system. So the planets and the asteroids, the moons, everything that we see in the solar system and the sun all formed out of that same nebula. The Earth is about 4.54 billion years old. That's what scientists think. It's about 4.54 billion years old. After that, you can see that there was a time after the Earth formed that there wasn't any life on the planet. It was bare and devoid of any organisms. But about 4 billion years ago, we got our first forms of life, and those are called prokaryotes. You might remember from earlier in this year, prokaryotes are cells without a nucleus, okay? Something very important happens a couple of million years after that. About 3.5 billion years ago, these prokaryotes start to do photosynthesis, which is huge for us because what they're doing is they're taking that energy from the sun and they're converting it into oxygen, which is going to be very, very important, especially for larger animals like us. Large animals, we just can't survive without oxygen. We can't make enough energy. So for billions of years, these prokaryotes are doing photosynthesis, pumping oxygen into the atmosphere, and that's going to be huge for us. Eventually they do that for millions, billions of years, and then we get to this point, this is about a half billion years ago, we get something called the Cambrian explosion. Once the atmosphere hits about 20% oxygen, we're able to support these large forms of life. And so we get a lot of different organisms appearing. We get jellyfish and mollusks and arthropods, worms. We see a lot of new types of life that hadn't been on the Earth up to this point. Something else that I wanted to talk about is this term right here called tetrapods. Okay, a tetrapod is any animal with 4 limbs. We're going to talk about them later in this unit, so just kind of wanted to throw that out there for you to remember. And then time goes on, we get the dinosaurs, we see new forms of life emerging, birds, mammals, flowers, and bees, and then Homo sapiens and primates are fairly new to the scene. Homo sapiens have been on the planet for about 2 million years, which I know seems like a really, really long time to us, but when you talk about it on a geologic time scale, which is what this is, 2 million years is really just the blink of an eye. So humans really haven't really been around that long at all. So what I wanted to do through this unit is we're going to talk about some of those big steps that I talked about. The first forms of life, what happened after organisms started to do photosynthesis, and we'll just kind of walk through some of these important steps that happened along the way. So let's go ahead and get the ball rolling on that. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is something known as chemical evolution. Okay? Remember that when the Earth first formed, we didn't have any life on the planet at all. Okay? We would call this a pre-biotic state. So before life can form on a planet, we need the building blocks of life. Well, what are the building blocks of life? Think back earlier in this year when we were talking about something known as macromolecules. Okay, macromolecules are the building blocks of life. As far as macromolecules go, there are 4 main types. You have proteins, which are made up of amino acids. You have lipids, which are made up of fatty acids. You have carbohydrates, which are made up of monosaccharides. And you have nucleic acids, which are made up of nucleotides. So we need to build those monomers and then eventually these polymers. And then once we have these macromolecules, proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids, then we can start to form more complex forms of life. So there's a term I need us to know, abiotic synthesis. Okay, this is inorganic molecules are reacting to form these macromolecules that I was talking about earlier. And I'll walk you through how scientists think that happened. A big part of this process is known as polymerization, which is when small monomers spontaneously join to form these larger polymers like macromolecules. Okay? So I wanted to talk about these 2 scientists and their experiment. So Miller and Urey did this experiment on something known as the primordial soup. What does that mean? Well, the primordial soup is an idea that suggests that life could arise from non-living molecules. Early Earth had a mixture of gases, water, and electricity. And what Miller and Urey were trying to find out is, could that gas, water, and electricity come together in a way to form some of these monomers that could then build our macromolecules. So what Miller and Urey did in their experiment, it showed that inorganic compounds such as amino acids could form from gases, water, and electricity. What they did is they used methane, ammonia, and hydrogen to simulate the early Earth's atmosphere. The early Earth atmosphere did not have much oxygen, but it did have a lot of methane, ammonia, and hydrogen. Okay? On the early Earth, there was lightning, and so what they used is electrical discharges to mimic that lightning. We had a liquid water reservoir to represent Earth's oceans, and after about a week of sparking this water with their electricity, the contents of the flask had visibly changed with the emergence of amino acids. So over the next couple slides, I just wanted to talk about their experiment in a little bit more detail. This is how they set it up. So Miller and Urey designed an apparatus to simulate early Earth's atmosphere, which included those gases that I mentioned, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen, as well as water vapor. What they did is the gas mixtures was exposed to electrical sparks to simulate lightning, which would provide energy to drive chemical reactions. The gases circulated through the apparatus, which contained a heated water flask to simulate the primordial ocean. So what they're doing here is they're trying to make this experiment as similar to the Earth when it first formed as they could. There was some water, there was some lightning, and there were gases in the atmosphere. Could these different ingredients come together in a way to form our monomers, which would then make our macromolecules? That's what they were trying to figure out. And so they had all of this equipment to kind of simulate that. This is the ocean on the Earth. This is the lightning up here. And they're running the water through it and see if they could get these amino acids to form out of it. Let's see how that went for them. So what they did is they had a condenser which would cool the gases, and this would cause them to form droplets and cycle back through the system, almost like the water cycle. The results, after running the experiment for about a week, the apparatus contained organic compounds, including amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. The conclusion here is that the experiment supported the idea that organic molecules essential for life could form under early Earth-like conditions, leading credence to the theory of abiogenesis, which is life arising from non-living matter. So this was a huge step in our understanding of life on Earth. It showed that Earth had all the ingredients that they needed, and it just needed a little bit of energy in that form of lightning to kind of get those chemical reactions to happen. Once we started to build our monomers, then we were able to build our polymers, which are those macromolecules that I talked about. And then once we had our macromolecules, it was really just a matter of time until we started to see life emerge on the planet. So that's just a brief overview of how life got us started on our planet, and we'll talk about it a little bit more when I see you next time. Your teacher has some assignments for you to work on today, so make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.